Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Williams, and I'm the head of animation at Escape Studios. And this is a webinar about designing and creating great characters. Do feel free to interrupt at any stage and ask questions about what I'm talking about, and I'm very happy to stop and take questions and answer them as we go along. So this is about creating and designing great characters. The reason it's about both, not just designing characters, is because I don't think you can actually separate the two out. And the real message that I want to talk about is how important the business of designing characters is really connected to the business of creating them. You need to figure out who your characters are. And I've had quite a lot of experience with character design on movies and also character design on my own projects. If you look me up, you'll find a lot of stuff about animation, because that's mainly what I've done. I've worked on about 40 animated films over the years. And when I've been a character designer, it's usually been helping out on a project. Because I was working on the film anyway and they needed some help in the character design department, so I've helped out on that project sort of as and when I was needed. But I've also been doing this cartoon strip in the Times for 25 years now. It's in the law pages of the Times. Here's this guy on the screen. This is Sir Geoffrey Bentwood QC, who's one of my main characters. And that's all my own work. I didn't have a client here who told me what they wanted. This is all my own creation. And so I've sort of watched these characters kind of evolve and change over time. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that experience and also some of the mistakes that I made in the early days and how I would do it differently if I were to start it up from scratch. The reason we're doing this, by the way, is because we're doing a character design evening class at Escape Studios. It's 8 weeks long. It's starting on the 25th of October. We've got 2 awesome tutors coming in. I'll probably do the first evening just as a general introduction, and then we'll get Vince and Andrea to come in. They're both really, really talented character designers. They both work here in the UK and have worked on loads and loads of film projects. Actually, I can show you a little bit about some of their work here. If I just throw this up here, this is some of Vince's work at hireanartist.net. He worked on Space Jam and various other pictures. And here's Andrea, and you can see her character design work. She's really, really super talented. Both of them are really, really good, and also both have a lot of experience with teaching. So I think they'll be really excellent to deliver this class, which we are doing for the first time. We've not done this one before, but I think it's going to be really awesome and really, really cool. So character design is not just about drawing. And this is the key thing, the key message I want to get over. It's really about creating the characters. So as a designer, you kind of need to think as a writer as well. The easiest way to get into writing is to write what you know. And that is in itself a cliche, and cliche is very much what we're trying to avoid. One of the hardest things when you create characters for the first time is to stop them becoming cliched, because cliche is what tends to fill our heads when we don't have anything else in there. When I see portfolios for our undergraduate courses at Escape Studios, people applying for the courses, I see them filled with characters, but they tend to be cliches. There are certain characters that come up time and again. There's the barbarian with the huge sword. There's the elf girl with the machine gun. There are certain characters that people draw because they like those characters and they're kind of doing a version of it in their heads. And so what you need to try and do as a character designer is to get away from that and try and come up with stuff that is more original and more true. So writing what you know means writing your memories, writing people you know, writing characters you know. And if you look at some of the work of some of the great character design, for example, Bill Watterson, who created the brilliant Calvin and Hobbes, he really wrote his childhood. And lots of cartoonists do this. Charles Schulz, who created Peanuts, did the same thing. And the characters tend to be based on either real people or kind of combinations of real people. You can take bits of people, kind of combine them, amalgamate them, but they need to be real for the characters to come alive. So here are some of the characters from my cartoon strip. This is from Queen's Counsel. These are some of the various characters that have appeared in the strip over the years. And here's Sir Geoffrey. He's my main sort of elderly barrister. He's based on various people I know. I'm not going to tell you who they are because they're all still alive. and is not a terribly flattering portrait. It's not hard to find very, very pompous people at the bar, and the main character that Sir Geoffrey was based on is no exception. And then there are various other characters. This guy's a tax lawyer. This is the kind of the junior, the pupil character, and he's very much based on me. I mean, he doesn't look anything like me, but he's the guy who everyone kicks. He's the kind of the junior, the guy who's terrible in court because he's a beginner. And this character up here was based on a guy I was at university with. I'm not going to tell you who he is. He's actually a Conservative MP now. He was a minister for a while. But he was somebody I was at uni with, and he always wore a double-breasted suit, and he was just one of those guys who you just knew was going to go into politics and be successful. And so I turned him into, again, this is not a particularly flattering portrait. But the trick with all of this stuff is to try and find people who you kind of know and recognize from your own life, and then essentially write them and create them and design them. This is going back. This is the Daily Telegraph back in 1995 when I was briefly a junior barrister, and they got me dressed up in my wig and gown. Well, not wearing my wig, but all of that stuff. So this is the main character. This is Sir Geoffrey, and like I said, he's based on somebody I used to know really quite well. Initially, when we started doing the cartoon strip, it was actually, I initially started doing it with a friend, and it was based on politicians, and the strip got rejected by everyone, including Private Eye. And then we realized that we could turn these characters into lawyers, and so then we sort of put wigs on them, turn them into lawyers, and it kind of worked. So I guess the moral of that story is that you can, don't discard your old material because you never know when you can reinvent it. Joanna's Vasu is asking, so is a character more of an exaggerated expression of a real person? That's exactly right. You're taking real people, and you're taking their characteristics, the sort of the warts, you're making them bigger, and yes, you're exaggerating, you're caricaturing them, you're pushing them. And of course, you've got to make them likable. I mean, you can't sort of write. This character was based on somebody I don't really like very much, but the character himself in the cartoon strip has to be likable. We have to like him, even though he's vain and pompous and greedy and various other things. So it's him, warts and all, but with also likable characteristics as well. So here's one of the early drawings, and you can see that my early drawings really weren't very good, and I've left this one in deliberately because I think it's a nice joke, but it's rather badly drawn. And I'm kind of embarrassed to show these ones now because they're quite crude, and I was quite lucky not to get fired by the Times back in 1993 when it started. But I had a mentor, the guy who was the art editor at the time, a chap called David Driver. And everybody needs a mentor in our industry. You need people who will fight for you, even though, you might have some bits about your work that aren't that great yet. But he fought for me and kept me at the Times, and I got lucky there because they kept me on, and I managed to grow the drawing style over the years and get better. What if I can only draw humans or women, asks Elisa. This is really just about practice. You start off drawing what you do know, and then practice from there. One of the things that we do when I'm teaching character design is do lots and lots of very, very simple exercises in class. So if you were to do our evening class in character design, you would find yourself doing a lot of exercises, all of which are designed to broaden your skill set and make you do things that you're a little bit frightened to do. Because we all tend to draw what's familiar and what we feel safe with. And the trick with this stuff is to draw things that you can't draw things that you don't know how to draw. And that's really the only way to get better, even though it means you'll do a lot of drawings that you don't like. This, again, is one of the early jokes. This was based on my own experiences as a barrister, and this was one of them. And then this was another one that was based on, me standing up to the clerks in chambers, which, of course, I never actually did because I was far too terrified. And on one occasion when I did actually stand up to them, I basically had no work for a week. So they showed me who was boss. So this cartoon was about that, about the fear of barristers of standing up to their clerks. So these were some early drawings. This is probably about a decade ago I did these. So this is a kind of intermediate style before I found a kind of fluid way of drawing them. And the designs have changed a lot over the years, but they've gradually got more slick and more attractive. And they're supposed to contrast each other. You've got the kind of fat elderly one. Here's kind of the guy in training. This is Crawley, who's their kind of the junior, and his Helena, who's the sort of the young idealist who still thinks that law can be about injustice. And I also did some drawings that were, I think part of the thing with this kind of thing is you want to design not just the characters themselves, but also the world that they're in. This is Crawley in court facing Humphrey, who's this very scary elderly and judge he's not a mean guy, but he's seen it all and he's got no time for beginners. And you want to draw the environment that they're in so that you start to come up with a world. Dana Marie asks, how are you coming up with an inspiration and a design for non-human characters? That's a good question. I think a non-human character, I mean, in a sense, they're all human, right? I mean, if you're Disney and you're designing Bambi back in 1942 or whenever it was, I mean, those are essentially, Bambi is just a child as a deer, right? So they're still human characters. You're still taking characters that you're just turning them into animals or monsters. Because we anthropomorphize everything. So when you're doing non-humans, it would still be based on people that you know. Here's some books. This was Queen's Counsel. This was the first book. I did a sort of silly thing with him from the front and the back. That's the front and the back of the book. There were various other books about leaving the law, which I did back in 1996 when I went off to be an animator. It was a silly book about the credit crunch. And I also did a bunch of designs for Tim Kivan, who did a blog called Baby Barrister, which became very, very successful. He wrote a bunch of books about it. And he rang me up and said, would I design his characters, which was fun. And I did it. And they were sort of adaptations in a way of my own characters. And he had his characters were actually called, so the Baby Barrister was called Baby Barrister, get it? And there was a guy in Chambers who was this sort of old, kind of fat, rather corrupt guy who he called Old Smoothie, and that was the names of all of his characters were sort of Old Smoothie or Big Mouth. I think this guy was a Tory MP. Head Clerk, another character who'd sort of seen it all before. And in this case, I wasn't writing my own stuff. These were very much the characters that Tim gave me to do, and I designed them for him, which is always a slightly different exercise. And there you're coming up with somebody, you're writing somebody else or drawing somebody else's material. Joseph asks me, would I make a TV series of my comic strip? Yeah, I'd love to. I don't think anyone's. With the trouble with Queen's Counsel, although I'd have to say, it's a successful cartoon strip because it's been running for 25 years. Although I hate to say that because the next thing that will happen is the Times will ring me up and say you're cancelled. But and I guess that is a success, right? A quarter century of a cartoon, but it is pretty niche. It's just for lawyers, and I doubt anyone would want to make it a TV series. Now, Tim, who was doing Baby Barrister, he did at one stage, he sold the rights to a production company. It didn't go anywhere. It didn't get made. But I mean, there's a lot, courtroom drama certainly works, but he wasn't able to translate it into a series in the end. Anonymous attendee asks, can you recommend cheap drawing software? Now, and actually this is a really good question. And the reason I'm not actually doing any drawing in this webinar, it's not, usually the webinars we do at Escape Studios are about technology, right? Usually it's about demonstrating some piece of software. And you'll see that I've got Photoshop open here. I've got Photoshop, so I could do some drawing, but ultimately there's no real software that helps you with stuff. I mean, I just use Photoshop. I still draw by hand. So I'll still do a drawing on paper. This is all done in pencil and then scanned into Photoshop and then painted in Photoshop using the Photoshop color tools. But it's such a basic level of technology that it's almost not worth demonstrating because there's a million things at YouTube that will show you the same thing. Photoshop, of course, does have a license fee, and you have to pay about £100 a year to have a license for Photoshop, which I do because I use it for my work. But there is another piece of software called GIMP, which does the exact same thing, and it is free. And you can download GIMP, and you can use it, and it's just like Photoshop, and it's just as good. I use Photoshop because I'm used to it, and it's worth it for me to have software that I'm familiar with, that I know is supported, rather than use GIMP where I don't particularly like the interface. But it does just the same thing, and it is just as good. These are some of Tim's books, Law and Peace, so I did these designs for him, and if he ever did another book, I'd be delighted to do more of them. These are some drawings that I did. This was a cartoon strip called The Tatler. It was about art dealers. I did it with a friend who was an art dealer. It didn't last. And I think in a way these characters I think I didn't really know so well, and there was perhaps a less of an element of truth about it. It was more of a contrivance than Queen's Counsel was. This was Ronnie Smiles was based on an art dealer. It was a famous art dealer with a similar name in the mid-90s, late 90s, who was a sort of art guy. And it was kind of based on him. But I didn't know him, and neither did my friend, and the whole thing I think it was a bit superficial in the end. It's one of the cartoons from the early days. I mean, I liked the jokes, but it didn't last. And I think ultimately what you've got to do is, you've got to find the characters that are really true. Adrian asks, how do you work out your color palette? And actually, this is a really good question, and it's taken me a long time to figure out my color palette. So if we actually go to Queen's Counsel, I can show you the website where you'll find the characters. I use this green for the books and also certain reds, and there's a skin tone for the characters as well, and their hair, and a brown for the chairs and the desks. And it's taken me a long time to figure this out, and it's one of the things that I kind of wish I'd done in the first place, was actually figure out the palette right in the beginning. But I have to say, it actually wasn't in color, because if we go back to 1993, now I've actually changed some of these since then. So that's actually a newer one where I've gone over the same thing. But the original drawings were not in color. They were black and white, because everything was in black and white then. And I only actually changed it. I've gone back over these. You see, I had some time on my hands a few years ago and redid some of the early ones. But it actually only changed into color, I think, in 2007. And I think if I scroll down here, we should find a point when it actually switches. I can't remember, either 2007 or 2008. And so what I do now to find the color palette, so 2008, I think it switches about halfway, possibly 2009. So it switches, and I just go back to the same cartoons now and do the color palette is just, I just basically open up an old cartoon strip and I use the color picker in Photoshop, and I just select my palette. So it's just this one here. You just click on that one, and then open it up and click on the color, and away you go. So once I found the green, law books tend to be this kind of particular green, and there's also a particular red as well, because law is kind of a grey world, but with certain colours. But there's actually a great website I found recently. I was having lunch with Andrea, who's going to be one of the people who's going to be teaching the course, and she came up with this. This is actually a good introduction to the Escape Studios animation blog, where I blog regularly, and you can see stuff about animation that we're doing here. And here we go. I was having lunch with Andrea, and she said, do you know about Adobe Color, which is awesome. It's this really great site. And so, for example, you can click, let's say you're doing army colors. Let's say you have to create a military character. It gives you a series of colors, and it will pop up, there we go, some greens. And you can use these as a kind of starting point so that you can figure out your color palette. And I have never used this before. I haven't actually tried it, but it looks really, really cool, because you want to find the kind of 5 or 6 main colors that you're going to use. Because really, when you're working with color, it's all about the colors you don't use, right? Because you don't want it to get too complicated. So for example, here, my color palette, I can see I'm not liking that very much because it's getting too busy. But here it's a little bit better. And when they're all in chambers and I know I'm on my kind of home turf, I know I'm using a palette that is restricted and isn't overly complicated. Here's a question: how can we start? Dana Marie Taracheva asks, how can we promote ourselves successfully apart from online websites? No matter what, people don't want to hire you. How can you make them thinking that you're a unique case and they can hire us? Now, this is a really difficult question. This is how to get hired. And there's no easy answer to this. So I was on a webinar, I was on a web panel at Annecy last year, the animation festival. And it's always worth going to animation festivals because you get to meet recruiters. And you really, really want to know who the recruiters are. And let's see if I can find, here we go. It was this one here, putting your best foot forward, animation careers advice at Annecy. So I was on this panel with all these people, and one of them was this guy, Ariel Goldberg, who was a studio recruiter from Nickelodeon in LA. And it was really interesting because people asked him about how he hires people, and he's exactly the kind of guy that you want to know if you're in the character design or the concept design. There he is, that was him, Ariel. If you're in the character design business, that's me on the left and a bunch of the rest of us. And they asked him, how do you, I'm sorry about the formatting here, something's gone work. But he said, One question he was asked, and here it is, how long does he take to look at an individual portfolio? Because he's basically looking at tumblers. Have a guess, he replied. 5 minutes came the answer. Actually, he's responded, it's 7 seconds. And that's pretty terrifying. So he's really looking at your work very, very briefly. And so what you want to do is make sure that your best stuff is up there, up front. So for example, if we go to Andrea's site, she's got some really nice work up here. And I'm just going to skim through it. And I'm going to, 7 seconds, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 7, 1,000. Okay, I've already made a decision about Andrea's work. I mean, this is a beautiful piece of work right here. I already know she's really good. And then the next question is going to be, is her work right for the thing that I'm designing or I'm working on? And that's a much tougher question because, of course, everybody's looking not just for talent, but also for people whose work suits the kind of thing they're after. So that's the other thing that's tough. But I would say, go to festivals like Annecy, go to anywhere where the recruiters are, meet the recruiters, find out what they're looking for, and find out who's hiring, and make sure that your own website only includes your best work and the stuff that's really good. Jana Varsu asks, is it helpful to use color as an expression of character, as a hint of specific characteristic, such as red for a violent character? Oh, absolutely. And color design is incredibly important. And if you look at, say, the Mr. Men, you're looking at, contrasting characters. Little kids have trouble deciphering a complex world. So you want colors that are contrasting and simple to understand. Here's a movie that I worked on back in 2003, Robots. It's actually the movie I learned CG animation on. Really, really nice color palette. So this color palette here for Rodney is based on those old VW camper vans for the 1960s. And you can see that all the colors in Rodney are kind of variations on that blue that you see on those old camper vans. And Ratchet here, the baddie, he's obviously a city type, right? He's a Wall Street guy. And his with the red tie and the kind of very, very sleek suit. The Lion King is another example of really, really beautiful use of color. A color palette that says African savanna. We all know that from nature documentaries, and they're using a limited color palette, but one which is very consistent and appealing. And if you look at almost any really nicely designed animated film, you'll find this. Here's Robots. So the Rusties were basically the colors of the rainbow. Green for this character here, I can't remember his name. Then blue for Diesel, red for Fender, Rodney, What's-Her-Face, and the other guy, I can't remember the character's name now. But you've got these contrasting shapes, contrasting colors, contrasting voices, and contrasting animation style, all of which are super important. So Lucy asks, is it better to keep the color palette minimal? Yes, absolutely. And that's why that website that I just showed you is so useful. Because the thing with color is you very, very quickly find yourself dealing with too many colors. So you want to reduce the amount of colors that you use. Good color design is all about, there are literally, there are millions of colors, right? You go into the color wheel and there are millions of them. So your color design is quickly going to get complex. And one of the exercises that Andrea does is about what she'll do in class is she'll take a still from a movie and says, right, find the 5 or 6 colors in this design, so that you're really picking out the important colors that are being used in that particular color palette, and you're broadly speaking sticking to those colors. And again, it's all about not letting it get too complicated. Think about a film like WALL-E, that Pixar made. Think about the color palette. There's no green, right? It's all browns and reds and oranges, and a kind of brown world without plants or without green. So Masama has asked, is there a game or a movie, in your opinion, that's been successful in its character design, and why? Yes, absolutely. If we go back to my design and animation slides here are a series of examples of good design. So Lion King, that's a movie I worked on back in 1993. They're now remaking it. And again, it's an example of brilliant design. And what's so nice about this is who all the characters are immediately. Some of the female lions look a little similar, but you know who Mufasa is. You know who Simba is. We know the hyenas aren't so easy to distinguish, but it doesn't matter because they're a gang, so they're fine. And you know who Scar is, the baddie. So you've got an overall coherence of design, but they're very easy to tell apart. And I think if you look at, again, Winnie the Pooh is another really nice example of this. Great study in character contrasts. I got to work on these back in the early 2000s on Piglet's Big Movie. I was in Tokyo for 6 months working on this. They were great fun characters to animate because they're all designed differently. They have great color contrasts. They have different personalities, and they also animate differently. So as an animator, you've got lots and lots of fun you can have with these characters because they're all so different. And contrasts in the design and the color and the character and the personality and the animation style is really, really important. Jungle Book, of course, the original Jungle Book did this superbly well. Seven Dwarfs all have their contrasting personality, although not so much color, interestingly, but they were still learning on that film. Well, The Rabbit, another movie I worked on back in 1987, again, great contrast with these characters. Interestingly, this was all shot up the road from in Shepherd's Bush in the Dimco buildings, which is currently a giant bus shelter. DreamWorks, very, very good at this. Kung Fu Panda and Shrek, great clear design contrast. I don't say there's a particularly beautiful character design, but it's very, very well designed and very clearly contrasting. And some of the movies that I worked on back in the late 90s, such as this one, were much less successful in this regard. They tended towards a very realistic style in the early days of DreamWorks, and it meant that some of the characters were harder to tell apart. So The Prince of Egypt, for example, which was a beautifully designed film. I mean, they had the best character designers you could find, but I think it was possibly hard to tell these characters apart. And so these weren't really family films, because I think for little kids it was more of a challenge. Here's an example of a movie with design problems from my own childhood. I remember going to see this film when I was a kid, and I had no idea who all these rabbits were. I could not tell one from another, and I remember being bored after about 20 minutes because I just couldn't follow the story. I couldn't tell one rabbit from another. They're actually supposedly remaking this, and I hope they get it right this time, because you've got to separate them out. Another example of a film that had problems was Valiant. This was a movie that I almost worked on, and I actually didn't work on it because I didn't like the designs. And I remember them taking a look at these characters' design, and I just thought, this isn't going to work. It's too busy. They tried to make contrast, but it just didn't work for me. And I thought, I don't think this movie is going to take off. And I don't think it did. Here's another question from anonymous attendee. How important is it for an illustrator or character artist to maintain a certain style of drawing? I think variety of styles is important. I mean, obviously you want to have your style that you do and you do well. If you look at, Andrea's styles, you can see she works in a variety of styles, but you can sort of see the stuff she really likes doing. I can see that this work here probably is very much the kind of work that she loves to do. But most, if you want to stay in business, you're going to be working for clients. And working for clients means being adaptable and being able to work in a variety of styles. So I would say, you always want to have your core style that you work in, but then be adaptable and be able to do what clients want. Because clients will say to you, I like this, but can you make it a bit different or a bit older or a bit younger, and I want it a bit more manga or a bit less manga. But you do need to show variety. I mean, that can be a real challenge for getting hired on any project, is if the producer doesn't feel that your style is suitable for the project. And you will think, well, I can work in any style, but the producer only knows the kind of styles that they can see at your website. So you might, when you do your website, you could break it up into styles, manga style, Disney style, Looney Tunes style, or different styles of work that you do. Masama asks, how do you personally find inspiration for character design? Well, going back to Queen's Counsel, these characters were all based on characters that I knew. They were all based on people that I knew. So without wanting to go over material I've already covered, these characters here are all they're all well, they're not all, but most of them are based on people I know. This was based on an amalgam of a couple of lawyers. This was based on an ex-girlfriend. This was the head clerk. This was based on the head clerk where the chambers that I used to work. It's kind of a caricature of him. This one wasn't so much. He was the client, the kind of downtrodden client. this guy, again, he's the sort of the criminal who is always in trouble. And this is the girl from HR. So, I mean, some of them are based on, they're usually based on, there's a guy, about 3 people in this character here. But I sort of learned this, I learned this from my father, who created, so if you go and look at a movie like The Thief and the Cobbler, which I worked on back in 1992. So the villain in The Thief and the Cobbler is Zigzag. And Zigzag is based on 2 or 3 people who my father really, really particularly disliked. I know who they are. I'm not going to tell you who they are. But they are kind of, so Zigzag is kind of a caricature of 1 or 2 of them. But it's an amalgam. It's not one guy in particular. It's sort of 2 people kind of put together and with their extreme characteristics highlighted and exaggerated. So I think you want to be looking at life as a cartoonist, as a caricaturist, as a designer. You're an observer of life. You always want to be carrying a sketchbook around with you, and you want to be drawing people, and you want to be thinking about the characteristics that people have and what makes them interesting and what makes those people special, and how you might use them as a character. It's what writers do all the time. You know, anybody who has any kind of intimacy with a writer will find themselves being written into their characters, or elements of them into their characters. And writers fall out with people all the time because of doing this. Anonymous attendee asks, do you know how we can animate the shadows of a character when he is moving, jumping, facial expression? Shadows. I'm not sure I quite understand. I guess you just draw the shadows in, right? I mean, I'm not sure quite what that means. You just paint the shadows. If you're ever stuck for reference, just look at Google Images, or there's no shame in copying artists whose work you like. Just make sure you don't copy it too closely. And there's a fine line between inspiration and plagiarism. A line I'm sure I've crossed a few times over the years. In fact, actually, I remember when Tim Cavan, who did Baby Barrister, first contacted me and asked me if I would do the designs of his characters. He said, have you read Baby Barrister? And I said, well, I've got to be honest with you, I started reading it, but then I stopped, not because I didn't like it, because I liked it too much. And I thought, if I read your stuff, I'm going to start stealing it. So I thought, because I have no self-control, I thought I'd better just not read it, and that I won't be tempted to pinch any of his jokes. Is there any 2D animation software that you have a preference for? So I would say I haven't used a lot of 2D animation software, except outside of, I mean, you can obviously animate in Photoshop, but not particularly well. The one that everyone seems to favor, the folks that I know, is TV Paint. That's the one they use at the animation workshop in Denmark, which is a very good school I've taught at. They favor that, and that seems to be the best one. I would say if you had to pick one, probably TV Paint is probably the best one right at the moment. Masama asks, what advice can you give for creating characters that already exist? So I assume this is kind of for a client. So the client gives you a character, and what you want, when you're creating characters, you want to know as much as you can about them. And so this is really all about having a backstory. You want to know everything about the characters that you're creating. So here's some other slides that we haven't touched on. You want to know about characters. So let me let's just talk about this guy for a brief moment, Konstantin Stanislavski. He wrote a great book called An Actor Prepares. And now we're talking about acting, but this still applies to design, because Stanislavski says, cliché will fill up every empty spot which is not already solid with living feeling. And what that means is that if you haven't created an original idea, then when you start to draw or when you start to design, then cliché will crowd in without you even noticing it. So the trick is to try and not make things cliched. And that's why writing what you know is so important, because as soon as when you write a character, when you write a person, or you design a person that you know, it's not a cliche, because they're a real person. That didn't come from somebody else's characters. It came from stuff that you have yourself researched. They're not cliches or stereotypes. And a lot of what we do is about recreating or coming up with characters, reinventing archetypes and making them interesting. So you need a backstory. And that means the character needs to have a history. And that means you've got to write them. You've got to know. So if you're doing a caricature or a design for a client, the client will tell you who these characters are. So when I was designing the characters for Baby Barrister, I would pester Tim. What are these people like? You know, what are they doing? What do they read? What do they have for breakfast? well, not what do they have for breakfast, but what kind of a lawyer are they? What do they believe in? What do they vote? You know, are they Labour? Are they Conservative? Are they idealists? You know, are they corrupt? You know, you want to know, and you want to know where do they go to school and who their friends are and where they go on holiday. Like I have to know I have to know how my characters vote. I need to know who their friends are. I need to know their politics. I need to know all sorts of stuff about them. I need to know their hopes, their dreams. So Geoffrey wants to be a judge, for example, although recently he doesn't want to be a judge because judges have had their pensions cut and he's not so keen anymore. But you want to write them up. You've got to know their stories and character flaws and, you know, James Bond, and we all know what his flaw is, or used to be back in the days when he was, you know, it was rather different to what he is now. But the weaknesses, the A.A. Milne characters are great because they're sort of simple. You know, Pooh is greedy, Piglet is frightened, anxious, Eeyore is depressed, and his glass is always half empty. And you know, these are great characters because there's always a little bit of Eeyore in all of us, and there's a little bit of Piglet in all of us, and there's a little bit of Pooh Bear in all of us. And we certainly know people who represent these characters. So if you're writing for a client, you've got to find out as much as you can about that character. Lanry Onifade asks, forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, do you have any tips for drawing more realistic character designs? It's harder to do. The more you tend to more realism, the more difficult it becomes to caricature. And I think if you go back to there we go, Prince of Egypt. So that was DreamWorks' first film, and they were still stuck in this rather kind of realistic style, and it just became much harder to distinguish the characters. So it is harder. You're going to have to use color a lot. So for example, in you know, here with The Road to El Dorado, Miguel and Tulio, one of them was blonde and one of them was dark. Maybe there should have been bigger differences, different skin tones. You know, you really want anything. What you don't want is all your characters to look the same, because that is just death. But it is harder the more realistic you get, for sure. Dana Marie asks, what would you recommend as online free lessons? I mean, that's a good question. There's a very good series of videos on gesture drawing. Let me see if we go back to the blog, because I do blog about this kind of thing. Here we go. Learn gesture drawing at YouTube with Proco. These are really nice classes, and you can go to this YouTube channel. So if you look up gesture Proco YouTube, you should find this guy's classes, and they're very, very good, and I recommend them. And I've used these for gesture drawing classes. Obviously, we teach life drawing at Escape Studios because it's part of the animators tool set. So these are something that I definitely would recommend. Joseph asks, what makes you go into animation from law? I think, Joseph, that's a question we'll save for the pub one night. But I'll give you the brief answer is that, you know, in the end, the animation industry is a much more fun and interesting place to be than law. And look, law is a great career. And if I'd stayed with law, I would have had a great career. But I don't really, you know, I mean, animation, it can go anywhere. And we've been lucky because animation used to be this sort of little cottage industry, but it's now expanded and grown and has become really an enormous industry with so many opportunities now. So, you know, animation is everywhere and it's increasing and growing. So, but the short answer is I got a great offer to go and work at Warner Brothers on a feature film called The Quest for Camelot, which was a terrible movie. Well, not a terrible movie, a mediocre movie, but I had a great time working on it. It was a really great opportunity. Anonymous attendee asks, I feel I've been making characters too perfect. How do I avoid a Mary Sue? I think perfection is for the next life. I don't know. I'm not sure quite what it means. I'm not sure what you mean by a Mary Sue. Mary Sue characters are bland, but I'm afraid I'm creating them. I think, again, you know, you've got to dig into real people. Try and caricature the people you know. Find people's curious characteristics, or you know, the things that you have found about real people, and use them as the foundations for your characters. Karen asks, I'm a motion graphic designer trying to get into character design. Would taking a character design class be better than taking time off to create characters and build a portfolio? I mean, I think what you want when you do any kind of a course, what you're looking for, of course, you can do free stuff on YouTube, and that's brilliant, and you should do as much of that. But ultimately, what you want in our industry is feedback that helps you get better, and that's why school is worthwhile, right? That's why it's worth taking a course, because you're going to find someone who's really good, who's going to teach the course, and you're going to learn from them and get better and hopefully stay in touch with them after the course is over. I always encourage my students to keep in touch with me. And, I try and mentor people just in the same way that I was mentored when I was an animation student or when I was a young animator. I have had many mentors over the years, and some of them have been really talented. I mean, I'm lucky I can count on, obviously, my father mentored me very meaningfully. I got mentored briefly by Andreas Deja, the brilliant Disney animator who was, the lead animator on Scar, and I was mentored by Max Howard, who was a producer at DreamWorks, and also to a lesser extent by Don Hahn, another producer at Disney, and very, very experienced producer. And all these people have mentored me to a greater or lesser extent. And so I try and mentor my students. And that's really what you're paying for when you take a course, is someone who's going to sit down with you and help you make your work better and take the time to say, okay, let's work on your portfolio. Let's try and make it better. And you take tips from them and push yourself to do better and improve your work. So that's the real point of getting education and courses in design. For me, I always keep in touch with my students at Facebook, and I'll stay in touch with them, and I'm always available to look at work and try and also on a sort of informal basis, I try and help people find work and find them jobs and post jobs online and help people get employed. Joanna asks, horrors of life drawing. People won't stand still, especially in London. Do you have a tip on how to pick the thing that really describes someone, that one thing that allows an artist to draw original people without knowing them or having enough time to look at them without being creepy? Good question. I mean, people don't stand still, it's true. But you've got to get used to drawing fast. A lot of what we do when we do gesture drawing at Escape Studios, we're doing very, very fast sketches, poses that might last, 30 seconds. Sorry, I can't find the blog post. But really, really quick sketches. Here we go. His portfolio tips. So that's one of my fast sketches. That's probably a 30-second pose. That there is a 30-second pose. What we often do when I'm running gesture drawing classes is I'll get students to kind of, be characters. So one fun exercise that we do is, I'll get two students and say, okay, now do a movie poster. And they'll do, like do a cop poster or something, or just have people come up with ideas for character. I might get a really tall student and a really short student to work together, and we sort of create poses, and that's a really fun way into design. But you've got to understand, models are going to move. You've got to get used to drawing quickly. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, can be a long pose. And certainly I don't do any poses more than 10 or 15, because now you're really getting into the drawing, which is not really what this is about. It's all about capturing character and personality. You can do that pretty fast. You can draw people on the tube, and if they notice you drawing them, just kind of stop, draw someone else. Elisa asks, if you want to learn things, another YouTube artist is Mark Criley. He talks about making manga and stuff. Okay, cool, excellent. So I'm gonna Google them. So I'm always looking for new blog material. Mark Criley. Okay, Criley, manga guy. Okay, awesome. All right, I'll check it out. Thank you for that. I'll look into that in more detail afterwards. Elisa asks, how do I avoid torture porn? Gore for the sake of gore in horror. I don't know. I've got to admit that I've never really done horror stuff. It's not really my thing. I'm more a kind of light comedy person. I would just don't do it. Just try and create a character, try and create a horror character with no blood. Just try it as an exercise. See if you can do it without any blood. Once you drench everything in blood, it's a little... blood is a cliche, right? So try and do it without. Dana Marie asks, talent or luck to be noticed? I think both. You need talent, you need luck, but the other thing you haven't mentioned there is persistence. You've got to be persistent. And again, I come back to the post that I did at the blog about recruiters. That is going to festivals. Where are animation recruiters to be found? There's tons of information, by the way. You should, bookmark the blog and come back to it regularly, because I answer these kinds of questions all the time. Recruiters go to the big festivals. You need to get yourself to them. If you want to be in comics, go to Comic-Con. If you animation, go to Annecy. Go to FMX. Go to SIGGRAPH in the US, and then they do stuff in the UK as well. Ottawa, Zagreb, Hiroshima. There are lots and lots of these festivals. Escape Studios, we do the VFX Festival. It's coming up. It's coming up in February, and it's awesome. I mean, it's really an amazing event. And I would go even if I didn't work for Escape, because it's really, really cool. I've done a lot of blog posts about it. And I've done a lot of transcriptions of the talks that we have there. I mean, they talked about the making of Star Wars. You get tons of information on how the movies get made, and you meet the recruiters. I mean, they're there, right? I mean, that's where the recruiters go. And at FMX, you'll find them, and you'll find them at the Visual Effects Festival next year. And you'll also find them there's one coming up in London. Hold on, I just did a post on this recently. Yeah, Blue GFX Expo. That's coming up in London on the 9th of November, and it's free. Now, you can't book your place yet. I think if I go here, you won't be able to register yet, but you will be able to soon. Keep an eye on the blog, because I'm always blogging about this kind of stuff. Anonymous says, Quest for Camelot was awesome. Just saying. Thank you. It's very kind of you to say so. So Quest for Camelot, if I Google, I can show you the character that I worked for. Quest for Camelot, I didn't design Ruber, the bad guy, but I got to animate Ruber, which meant interpreting the design, which is sort of part of the fun. So these are some of my, that looks like, that's one of my drawings there. So I got to do this guy, and as an animator, you're not exactly a designer, but you have a hand in the design process. So I got to have a hand in how this character was manifested, and I did design his silly sword handle there. But anyway, it was it's not the world's greatest film. It has many, many flaws, but it was really, really super fun to work on. Oluwasamire Adatoro, apologies if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, asks, would you advise an apprenticeship route or university route for animation? I mean, I think look, it's very hard to get an apprenticeship without already having gone to university. I would say university is a great foundation, but you must pick a good course. Now, obviously, I'm going to tell you our undergraduate course at Escape Studios is good for animation. But I mean, it really is. I mean, we take seriously the business of creating studio-ready talent. That's why we're Escape Studios. There are other good animation courses, of course, but you must make sure you find a good one, and you must make sure you find who's teaching them, because that's the key thing, is who's teaching you and what do they know, or what do the tutors know? Because again, it comes back to mentorship. You've got to find a mentor. You want to find a really great tutor and make them be your mentor for the 3 years that you're at university. And they will help you, because that's what they're there to do. So I would say go to university and then find your mentor and then do apprenticeships. So Masama asks, if you could choose a few aspects when it comes to interesting characters, which would you choose and why? One of the things that that's a good question. One of the things we didn't actually really get onto, if I go back to the creating characters thing, which we just touched on earlier on, there are certain elements, I think, to great characters. So you've got to have a backstory with character flaws and all the rest of it. You've got to write that character, but you've got to know what the characters want. Even simple characters like Sylvester and Tweety, we've got to know what they want. We've got to know what motivates them. Or even somebody simple like Scrat. You've got to know what they're after, what stands in their way. And most, certainly in a feature film environment, characters tend to have to change because change is very, very difficult for us to do. And that's what we kind of watch characters do on the screen, is some kind of change. We want conflict between the two characters, Woody and Buzz. Who's going to be Andy's favorite toy? Frodo and Gollum both want the ring. There's also a lot of what-if-ery in character design. In this case, what if the toys came alive when the humans leave the room? What if a toy space ranger actually thought he really was a space ranger? So that's really important, the kind of what-ifery in characters. What if Buzz really thought he was a real space ranger? What if these creatures were part of some weird religious cult? What if an elephant could fly? You're going to find this all over animation. Another thing is voices. I know I'm kind of rattling through this, but we're almost out of time, so I'm going to have to stop soon. But, character voices, great characters all have a distinctive voice. Bugs Bunny does, Woody Woodpecker does, Porky Pig does. They're all done by the same guy. Of course, they're all done by Mel Blanc back in the day. The voice, of course, always comes first. You find the voice, then you do the animation. Music, often characters have their own music. If you think of great TV series, of course, Darth Vader has his own music. The Hobbits in Lord of the Rings have their own music. So music can be important. If you think of a great TV series like Peppa Pig, the music in that show is very important. That, by the way, is a really, really well-designed. Those are really well-designed characters. I mean, they're not maybe beautiful drawings in the classical sense, but that is an example of beautiful design. Syed asks me, what's my opinion about background artists? I'm probably not very well qualified to talk about that because I've done a fair bit of character design, but I wouldn't describe myself as any kind of painter. And that's really a bigger subject. Background artists tend to be painters, and you better go and learn painting if you're gonna figure that out. Joanna asks, will the course allow us to put together a show reel? Will we be ready to apply for jobs afterwards? So for the evening class in character design, I wouldn't say that it's a zero to hero course. Now, obviously, the undergraduate courses are. The short courses in animation also are. We expect you to start with basically nothing and then come out fully formed. But the evening classes aren't quite like that because it's only 8 evenings. You're going to get 8 evenings with me, with Vince, with Andrea. So I can't promise you a job at the end. I mean, of course, I can't promise you a job at the end of our undergraduate course either, except in a sense I can, because if you're diligent and you do your work, then there's no doubt that within 3 years, or even frankly within 3 months on our short courses, you can get to a job-ready state. But with an evening class, it is a little bit different. They're more of a taster, but you're going to meet some great character designers. You're going to get some meaningful and creative feedback. And yes, the whole point of it is to put together a demo reel at the end of it. And the kind of end result of the character design class is to create a portfolio of work to help you get work in the industry that you've chosen. So that's what it's all building up for. So that's very much the person. But that's what Escape is all about. We're all about, again, Escape Studios. The studios bit is studio-ready talent. That's what it's all about. Oriana asks, hello, Alex. I've got a little experience in animation and character design. Would I still be able to partake in the course you offer? Absolutely, of course. No, we take people at all different levels. Musama asks, what do I think of an art book, such as books like Zootopia that is dedicated? Yeah, you can, absolutely. Dedicated how the characters were made. And what is your advice on how to use these types of books? Well, the dirty secret is copy. Copy characters. That's how everybody learns. Of course, you don't then submit it to a client as your own work. But, copy characters. Copy the characters of the designs that you most love and adapt them a little bit, and you find yourself learning. I started off doing that. I started copying other people's work, and then gradually, if I look at my own cartoon strip, I was heavily influenced by other people's work. I was heavily influenced by, when I started the cartoon strip, I was heavily influenced by the Alex cartoon in the Daily Telegraph. And actually, I'm allowed to say this now because I've recently become friends with Charles Peaty, who does the drawings. And I told him over lunch the other day, I said, I started off stealing your designs. And he laughed and said, yes, I know. But since then, you've made it your own. So you can probably see the similarities. I was heavily influenced by this stuff back in the early days. But, you kind of copy, you're influenced. Everybody does it. And then over time, you find your own voice. But you must find your own voice. But start out by borrowing, start out by copying. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no shame in that. And then gradually over time, find your own style, your own voice. And I think probably it's 5 o'clock, so I think I need to stop now. But I'm just going to take one last question because Hussein asked, in character design, how much drawing is involved and how much software or tools are used? And really, it's a drawing business. It's really all about drawing. And yes, there's Photoshop, which makes our lives easier, or Cintiq if you can afford some really nice kit. I know most pros now use Cintiqs. I'm kind of old school for still drawing on paper and scanning my drawings, but I like it that way, and it suits me. And I like to be able to sell the original drawings, and you can't do that if it's all digital. I think we need to wrap this up. I'll tell you what, if anybody else has questions for me, do email me and I will be glad to answer. Here's my email address, alex.williams1@pearson.com. I will gladly answer email questions, so do email me individually and I'll be very glad to answer your questions. Thank you for your time. I hope it's been useful. It's actually been really fun and interesting for me. I don't usually love talking about my own work like many artists. I tend to be a little bit shy about talking about it, funnily enough. But it's fun because it's, when you talk about how your own characters came to life, you actually learn a lot about how you do it and a lot about the technique and how it developed. So it's been really interesting for me too. Thank you for listening. It's been a real pleasure, and do email me, keep in touch, and send me portfolios. Happy to take a look at your stuff and help out in any way that I can.